In the spring of 685, a Northumbrian king rode north of the Firth of Forth with the strongest army in Britain and did not come back. Ecgfrith died on a Pictish battlefield at Dun Nechtain. The kingdom that killed him controlled the entire north and east of Scotland. Then it stopped appearing in the written record, not gradually. Within a single century, the Picts vanished from history entirely. 7 provinces, 800 house platforms at one settlement alone. 3 kings killed in a single afternoon, 1 extinct language, and not one surviving document written by the people themselves. They were not conquered out of existence. They did not migrate away. The conventional answer says that Vikings destroyed them and that Gaels replaced them. Genetic evidence says something else happened. Who they actually were, what killed the kingdom, and why the name vanished when the population did not. The term Dark Ages was coined to describe collapse. Applied to northern Britain, it means something narrower. Not the fall of anything, but the absence of anyone writing it down. Beyond a certain line on the map, the record simply thins until there is nothing left to read. That line was fixed by Rome. Roman forces mounted expeditions deep into the highlands, but their sustained presence was confined to the ground between 2 frontiers. Hadrian's Wall in the south, and further north, the Antonine Wall, the one almost nobody remembers. Above them lay territory the empire never held and never administered. The peoples living there were catalogued by Roman writers and then largely ignored. Catalogued, though, is the important word. Ptolemy names them: the Caledonii, the Vacamagi, the Decante, the Taixali, the Venicones, the Verturiones. These were not phantoms at the edge of the world. They were specific, located, indigenous populations, and Rome knew enough about them to write their names down. Tacitus gives an account of what happened when the 2 sides met directly. At Mons Graupius, in 83, a Roman force under Agricola inflicted a crushing defeat on a Caledonian host. The location of that battle is disputed to this day, but most proposed sites lie in Aberdeenshire, north of the River Dee, with the small mountain of Benachie among the strongest candidates. That matters more than it first appears. It places the battle inside the exact territory that would later become the political heartland of Pictish power. The people Agricola fought and the people who would dominate northern Britain 4 centuries later occupied the same ground. The word itself arrives late. Picti appears in the historical record in the year 297 in a panegyric, a formal speech of praise delivered to the Emperor Constantius. The line describes a nation still primitive and accustomed to fighting half-naked, succumbing easily to Roman arms. Latin Picti means painted, from pingere to paint. Consider what that actually is, not a name, a description. A physical observation about body decoration turned into a collective label by a professional flatterer whose job was to make a Roman emperor sound impressive by making his enemies sound like savages. That label stuck for 1,700 years. No Pict ever called himself a Pict. Whatever these people used for themselves, in their own language, among their own families, is not recorded anywhere. It was never written down by them, and the outsiders who did the writing had no reason to ask. A people known only by the name their enemies gave them have no defense at all once those enemies stop writing about them. The medieval sources had an answer for where the Picts came from, and it was not northern Britain. Bede records that they arrived from Scythia. The Pictish Chronicle, a legendary king list compiled in the late 10th century, some 2.5 centuries after Bede was writing, repeats the story and elaborates on it. The Picts as exotic arrivals, sailing in from somewhere distant and eastern, landing on a coast that was not theirs. Even the destination in that story is unstable. Scythia was a Roman geographical term, and it may not have meant the Pontic-Caspian steppe at all. It may have referred to the southern part of Scandinavia. If so, that is possibly what Bede had in mind. The origin myth cannot agree with itself about which direction the migration came from. The Chronicle adds its own flourish. Cruithne, mythical founder of Pictland, said to have ruled for 100 years, with 7 sons reigning after him. Their names correspond to the 7 provinces: Fib, Fidac, Fotla, Fortrio, Cat, C, Circin. The correspondence is too tidy to be accidental. Naming territories after eponymous founders was a standard device in early medieval literature, and this particular arrangement almost certainly served a political function, legitimizing the expansionist ambitions of Fortriu, which was the most powerful Pictish kingdom. Historian James Fraser doubts there were ever exactly 7 kingdoms at all. The number is doing rhetorical work, not descriptive work. Historians reached that conclusion from the texts alone. The genetics settled it. Adeline Moraz, Linus Girdland, Flink, and colleagues extracted genomes from individuals buried in Pictish period cemeteries at Lundin Links in Fife and Balintore in Easter Ross. Those sequences were compared against genomes from other Iron Age Britons and against modern Scots, particularly people living in regions once under Pictish political control. The results were not ambiguous. Using both allele frequency and haplotype-based approaches, the researchers placed the Pictish genomes firmly inside the Iron Age gene pool of Britain and demonstrated regional biological affinity. No foreign signal, no incoming population, no Scythia in any of its proposed locations. The Picts were genetically native to Iron Age Britain. They were not invaders. They were the indigenous population of the far north, the descendants of the tribes Ptolemy had listed and Agricola had fought, who rose to prominence in the vacuum after Roman authority receded. The Verturiones, first recorded in the 4th century, are unmistakably Pictish in later sources, which means the question everyone asks about the Picts has been framed wrongly from the start. If they never arrived from anywhere, then asking where they went is asking the wrong thing entirely. A disappearance is only remarkable in proportion to what disappeared. So the question becomes what these people actually built. Start with a sea stack on the Aberdeenshire coast, just south of Stonehaven and half a mile from Dun Nechtain. In the 1830s, a local gravedigger told a group of boys there was gold on top of it. They climbed it. What they found instead were carved stones, and they threw them into the sea. Those carvings were among the earliest examples of Pictish symbols ever recorded, destroyed within minutes of being found. Excavations at Dun Nechtain between 2015 and 2017, run by the University of Aberdeen under Professor Gordon Noble, recovered what the erosion had left. A promontory fort with a timber-laced rampart. Internal structures, most of them severely truncated. The wall the boys had disturbed was a surviving fragment of the southern rampart. The finds are the interesting part. Roman Samian ware, coarse pottery, glass fragments, a rare deep blue hemispherical Hofheim-type cup, either a diplomatic gift or the proceeds of raiding. Imports of that quality, that far north of the Roman frontier, indicate a well-connected elite. Alongside them, spindle whorls, querns, and metalworking burnishers. People were living there, not just holding it. Radiocarbon places the main occupation in the Roman Iron Age, 2nd to late 4th century, with the rampart and its embedded carved stones dating to the 3rd and 4th. That window is what makes the site rare. Forts are common before Rome and reappear from the 5th century onward, but examples from the intervening period are exceedingly scarce. Dun Nechtain sits in the gap, a prototype for the strongholds that would later define Pictish power. Then there is Tapo Nuth in Aberdeenshire, and it required new technology to see properly. Conventional survey had suggested a few hundred house platforms. LiDAR, laser scanning from an aircraft, combined with photogrammetry stitching hundreds of drone photographs into 3-dimensional models, revised that figure upward dramatically. There may be at least 800 platforms in total, dating primarily between the 3rd and 6th centuries. Below the hill, in the valley, sits the elite center at Rhynie. If even a small percentage were occupied simultaneously, the population approaches something town-like. Whether that reflects permanent year-round settlement or seasonal gathering remains genuinely unresolved. Assembly sites were used for legal judgment, dispute resolution, markets, festivals, and royal inauguration. They also held the sea. The barbarian conspiracy of 367 required seaborne coordination on a serious scale, and by the 6th century, a king of Orkney was attending a Pictish court on the mainland. This was not a marginal people at the edge of the map, which makes the silence that follows harder to explain, not easier. They spoke a language of their own. Bede lists it as one of the 5 tongues of the British Isles, alongside English, British, Irish, and Latin. Adamnan of Iona confirms it from the other direction. When Columba traveled the Great Glen, he needed an interpreter to preach, and a peasant and his entire household were baptized only after hearing the word through a translator. What that language actually was remains contested. There is near universal agreement that it was Celtic. The dispute is over which branch. P. Celtic covers the Brittonic languages, Welsh, Cornish, and Breton. Q. Celtic covers the Goidelic tongues, Irish and Scots Gaelic. In the modern period, the division is clean. Applied to a time before those distinctions had fully formed, it becomes very difficult indeed. The Brittonic case is substantial. In the 19th century, the antiquarian George Chalmers studied the Pictish king lists and concluded that Pictish and Brittonic were essentially the same thing. Whitley Stokes, examining the Irish annals, found strong similarities to Welsh. William J. Watson's place name, work across former Pictish regions, pointed the same way. Against that sits the substantial layer of Brittonic loanwords inside Scots Gaelic. James Fraser's proposal accommodates both, a Brittonic language progressively Gaelicized through prolonged contact. Whatever it was, it is extinct, and no one recorded it properly before it died. What they left instead was stone. Monumental carved stones across the north and east, generally dated between the 6th and 9th centuries. The double disc and Z-rod, the crescent and V-rod, the Pictish beast with its elongated head and peculiar form, compared variously to a dolphin, a seahorse, an elephant, a kelpie. Some stones carry Ogham inscriptions. The meanings of the symbols themselves remain entirely unknown. They left silver. A hoard at Norrie's Law in Fife, found in 1819, included a 7th century silver and enamel plaque bearing the Z-rod motif. Much of that hoard was sold off and melted down by the man who found it, leaving us to guess at what went into the furnace. At Traprain Law, Roman silver, looted and cut up for redistribution. And massive double-linked chains, 10 of them known. They may have marked their own bodies. Isidore of Seville describes an artisan working the point of a pin and the juice of a native plant into the skin, nobility distinguished by decorated limbs. Claudian writes of legionaries reading strange devices on the faces of dying Picts. The caution is necessary. This may describe temporary paint rather than permanent tattoo. Most of it refers to populations predating the kingdoms, and Fraser notes that Isidore sometimes confused Picts with Scoti. Monuments, metalwork, a language, and not one sentence of their own history in their own words. Everything the Picts became politically converged on one kingdom. Fortriu. It was founded most likely by the Verturiones, the tribal group first recorded by the Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus in the 4th century. The name may derive from a Brittonic root meaning fortress people, which is fitting. Their power sat around the Moray Firth, and one of its principal centers was Burghead, a fort crowning a headland that pushes out into the water, commanding the coastline in both directions. One warning before the kings. 3 separate rulers in this story carry the same name, rendered variously as Bride, Bruide, or Brude. They are not the same man. Keep the fathers in mind, because the fathers are how you tell them apart. Bride, son of Maelchon, ruled from around 554 to 584, with his court near Inverness. Columba's decision to travel the length of the Great Glen to reach him is itself a measurement of the man. Bede calls him Rex Potentissimus, a most powerful king. Adamnan records a king of Orkney present at that court, which implies an overlordship reaching well beyond the mainland. Irish sources mention Gaels fleeing the son of Maelchon during the 560s. By the late 6th century, Pictish rulers were already exercising regional dominion. Bride, son of Beli, ruling from 671 to 692, is the first monarch explicitly identified as king of Fortriu. In 681, he campaigned against Orkney. 4 years later, at Dun Nechtain, probably fought near Dun Nechtain, he destroyed a Northumbrian army. Ecgfrith, king of Northumbria and Bredai's own cousin, was killed in the encounter. Northumbrian power was confined south of the Forth permanently. Before that battle, the kings of Fortriu may well have been Northumbrian tributaries. After it, they were nothing of the kind. Bredai, son of Durail, appears in 697 at the convening of the Cain Adomnine, a treaty providing legal protection for non-combatants, particularly women and children. The gathering drew participants from across Ireland and Scotland. Aside from the Bishop Curitin, he was the only Pictish king to sign it. His signature affirms who is understood to speak for Pictland. That is the Verturian hegemony, consolidating from the 6th century and fully realized by the close of the 7th. Oengus, son of Fergus, built on it in the 8th, extending Pictish influence across most of what is now Scotland, with Dal Riata falling under Pictish domination. Fraser argues that it was these kings from this stretch of coast who forged a distinct and unified Pictish identity in the first place. An identity manufactured by a single dynasty lasts exactly as long as the dynasty does. The Viking Age is conventionally dated from the assault on the Northumbrian monastery at Lindisfarne on the 8th of June, 793. Across the 9th century, isolated raids escalated into full-scale invasion. The Great Heathen Army arrived in 865 and dismantled Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia. Norse activity concentrated in Caithness, Sutherland, and Galloway. Settlers seized the Isles, and by the middle of the century, a kingdom of the Isles had taken shape. Fortriu could not hold. In 839, the Picts suffered a catastrophic defeat, recorded in the Irish annals in terms that are unusually stark. The heathens inflicted a defeat on the men of Fortriu. Uan, son of Oengus, was killed. His brother Bran was killed. Ead, son of Boanta, was killed. Others, the annals say, almost beyond number. Casualties described as uncountable imply a campaign, not a raid. 3 major rulers died in a single engagement, including the king of Fortriu and the king of Dal Riata. The House of Fergus, which had held Pictland for the best part of a century, ended that day. And here the story usually stops, with the Picts destroyed by Norsemen. That version is wrong. What followed was instability, not extinction. Out of it came the House of Alpin under Sinead mac Ailpin, and he still held the title King of the Picts. The name survived the disaster by decades. What killed it was slower and quieter than any battle. His descendants presided over an unmistakable process of Gaelicization. By the start of the 10th century, the realm was increasingly being called Alba. Fortriu itself disappears from the sources after the early 10th century, seemingly divided into Moray and Ross. By the 11th or 12th century, the distinct Pictish identity had been completely subsumed into the Gaelicized kingdom. Now return to the Genomes from Lundin Links and Balintore and ask them the second question. Those sequences were compared against modern Scots, particularly people living in regions once under Pictish political control. The comparison demonstrated regional biological affinity. The Pictish dead are genetically continuous with the living population of the same ground. There is no replacement event in the record, no genetic discontinuity, no vanished people. What ended was a dynasty, killed in one afternoon on a battlefield we cannot precisely locate. What ended was a name, retired by a court that had begun speaking a different language. What ended was a tongue that nobody wrote down before it went extinct. The population never moved. It was absorbed into a kingdom that called itself something else, spoke something else, and told a different story about where it had come from. Return to the word, Picti, painted, invented by a Roman speechwriter to flatter an emperor, attached to people who already had a name for themselves that nobody bothered to record. The disappearance was never physical. It was a failure of documentation, compounded by a change of language. They carved their identity into stone and symbols we still cannot read, and left no history in their own words to contradict the histories written about them by Northumbrian monks, Irish annalists, and Roman propagandists. Vikings killed 3 kings in a single afternoon. Gaelic finished the job over the following 2 centuries. But the descendants of the people who built Taponoth, who held the Moray coast, who destroyed a Northumbrian army in 685, are still living in Fife, in Easter Ross, in Moray. They did not vanish. They were renamed. The DNA is the only witness that was never translated.